Welcome, everybody, to Cyber Insanity with your host, Andrew Berkuta and
Angelo Longo.
awesome. Well, thank you for a new season of podcasts. We do promise you some exciting things and exciting topics as always. And thanks, shout out to Gabby, who's our producer, and Kat Herder to make sure that everything goes well and we don't break things on the podcast and your screens are intact. Angelo.
What's going on? Who's that person?
I don't know. Who's that person? Should we talk to her?
A lawyer.
Let's make ladies and gentlemen, we do have a guest with us today. Angelo, would you like to introduce our new
esteemed colleague?
Esteemed colleague, yes.
I would like to introduce Rebecca Rakoski, Esquire. She is a friend and colleague. I've worked with her for a number of years, and I find her to be insightful, sarcastic, but fun to be around. and I do go to her for advice. So, Rebecca?
What an introduction. Good morning, guys. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. Well, thank you. Thank you for having us. Rebecca, so for those of our podcast listeners who don't know what you do exactly, you have a title of a cyber attorney. And I was wondering if you can kind of maybe just to take a few minutes, explain what that is, what your law firm is, and what you do, and maybe some things you can share with us.
Sure. So Rebecca Rakoski, I'm the co-founder and managing partner of XPAN Law Partners, and we are a boutique cybersecurity and data privacy law firm. So that sounds, very highfalutin, and to some degree it is. I'm very, I love my love the titles. But no, I mean, cybersecurity and data privacy law has really evolved in the past 10 to 15 years. And my firm, I was originally at a large regional firm for about my first 15 years of practice. I'm doing a lot of litigation, a lot of, what I would call reactive law, right? That's the litigation piece of it. And about 7 or so years ago, I decided, you know what, if I'm really going to do just cybersecurity and data privacy, I need to have a boutique firm because it's such a complex area of the law. It is constantly changing and evolving. So we formed XPAN really with the idea that we would focus exclusively on the area of cybersecurity and data privacy. And Angelo, who has known me for a long time, people thought I was like a little crazy. They were like, seriously, you're just going to do this? Like, why is a lawyer involved in cybersecurity and data privacy? You're not a tech person. Why are you here? And as Angelo well knows, I'm a little tenacious and a little bit of a nag. And I think those are two excellent qualities for your attorney. And so I was like, no, I belong here. And I just basically had to teach people why the legal side of cybersecurity and data privacy was such an incredibly important part of any business. And we really work on the proactive side of it. So we work with clients before, hopefully, there is an incident. And we work on understanding what their business is, how their data flows work. And then we create programs in and around how their cybersecurity and data privacy should work sympathetically with their business. Because it's not something where you can just pull a policy offline and plug it in. Every business collects data, uses data, shares data differently. So your policies, procedures, all of that has to be tailored to how your business operates. And then we do a lot of contract work and stuff because people don't think about cybersecurity and data privacy until there's a problem. And then there's a ton of provisions in contracts in and around that they're like, holy crap, we didn't even realize those were there. So that's kind of what we do. And then we also do incident response and investigations, and I do litigation still. But that's more of it's a smaller piece of my practice. I prefer to get to them early. It's like children, you know what I mean? You start with them in preschool and kindergarten. If I get to them early, hopefully I can save them from a life of crime. So that's what we do at XPAN.
Well, I read somewhere that being a cyber attorney, that is one of the hottest and most almost exponentially growth paths for anybody in a legal profession as a discipline to choose, because there's just ferocity in the industry today, right? There's breaches that are occurring almost, I hate to say it, daily. You're seeing something in the magazines or the trade rags or the websites or whatever. Regulation, I think for 2024, I'm seeing more teeth to the regulations. Um, but I don't think companies are really keeping up or up with, or even outright ignoring the cyber best practices. And I think that's you know, add that to executives being targeted almost from a personal perspective. Um, why are we not clued in to have a cyber attorney on retainer and represent us? I mean, why don't the businesses protect their people, defend their process and technology, and use a cyber attorney to guide them here?
So a lot of times I think, right, well, a lot of times I think they think that their general practitioner or their GC, their in-house general counsel, outside general counsel can handle that. And it's interesting, I often get brought in by general counsel because they get to a point where they're like, I can advise, and then they're like this looks really strange to me, right? If you don't practice in this area regularly, if you're what I would consider a dabbler, you're going to make big mistakes. Like the other day I was talking, I was negotiating a contract, and my adversary, the other person the other attorney, she was using a phrase. She was like, "Oh, we need your client to have security clearance." So that sent up. I was like, "Whoa, security clearance!" I said, Why do you have like Department of Defense contracts or something?" She's like, "Oh, no. We just want them to be only have access to certain information." I'm like, that's not the right word then, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're not talking about security clearance, you're talking access controls. So
right.
like, she didn't understand the word, like she didn't really understand the terms of art in our industry. And I say "our" because you guys are both cyber professionals. And
Right.
from a legal perspective, you have to understand the technology piece of it, and then you have to understand the legal piece of it and be able to kind of be that translator. And she didn't know how to be that translator. And no offense, she was a lovely person, but I just realized at that point I could run roughshod and have a good time with the contract, because she was going to have to look up every word, right? Like, I'm using
Right.
phrases and stuff. And so you want to use somebody who really understands and who practices in this area. And it is a huge growth area. So I teach at Drexel, at their Klein School of Law, and my cyber class is always packed, right? Everybody wants to learn about cybersecurity. But what I would say is you have to have the right temperament for this kind of work too. You can't be a nervous Nelly, right? You can't be like, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" Oh my God, because there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things happening. You have to be the voice of reason, and you have to understand, and you have to be able to slow things down a little bit, right? Because data breaches and incidents happen at a rapid pace, but you have to be able to kind of make sense of the chaos and be able to kind of navigate your client through that. So I think it's important that you don't rely just on people who are kind of dabblers. And I also think it's really important that you have a good temperament for it, and really and be able to understand the technology and the legal piece of it, and have experience too. I mean, people say to me all the time, they're like, "Well, you've been doing this for 20 plus years." I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wear and tear on this and on this, that, you know what I mean, that I've experienced a lot, and I understand how that all works." And younger attorneys are wonderful, and they're fantastic, and everybody thinks because they're young they understand technology, and they may, but they don't understand the law at that point either. You really need someone with a little bit of experience and to be able to kind of navigate through this. And particularly for C-suites. I mean, Angelo and I have had this conversation many, many times about, advising the C-suite appropriately, because they've got a lot of skin in the game, and their, rear section is usually hanging out there in terms of liability. So, I mean, we've talked about, what are some things that CISOs should be doing and thinking about as they're kind of moving forward in this as well, and maybe even having their own legal counsel separate and apart from because remember, when I represent a client, I represent the company, but the CISO should really have, I think, sometimes have their own private counsel to help them kind of guide them through it, because I mean, we've had this conversation about how volatile that position is within any company.
Yeah,
That's an interesting thing, Angelo. I mean, from your perspective, are you seeing your counterparts in the CISO world gravitating to engaging a cyber attorney for their personal self and then their companies? I mean, what are we missing?
well, I think you're seeing the next step, because the issue at hand is, um, we in these roles are getting hit with all this pressure, all these this responsibility, liability, etc., and we're not being given a great guidance from a legal perspective, because internally the lawyers are protecting the business. Externally, the lawyer that's hired to assist with some issue, problem, or whatever is there technically to protect the business and in the insurance company's interests. So that leaves this position sometimes without actual liability coverage, because they're, a lot of times they're not in a D&O position, so they don't fall under the coverage. So you have to ask for that. But secondarily, they end up in this point of, just paint a target on their back and let them go and see what happens. And so as we get smarter, as more people get hurt, damaged, their careers get ruined, you're going to see more and more people want a solution to this issue. And one of those solutions would be, hey, how can we protect ourselves and thus also do our jobs in a good and steady fashion? And that's always been an issue. But actually, from that perspective, hey, Rebecca, what could I do better?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I mean, first of all, negotiating that is part of like the business could, that could be part of compensation, is to have your own, counsel, private counsel, and they can work with the I mean, there's joint defense agreements and things like that.
Yeah.
There's going to be parts where that all aligns, and the business is invested in making sure that what the CISO has done is correct, right? Like it's all aligned. The other thing CISOs should be thinking about is, like, when I counsel my clients, I'm like, you guys have to have regular, I call them PSTs, privacy and security team, PST meetings. That PST reports up to the board every single time. And the board has a line item every single time on their board agenda to discuss cybersecurity and data privacy. Why? Because first of all, it changes every 5 seconds. So if you're not talking about it constantly, you've already missed the boat. People are like, oh, my documents are a year and a half old. I'm like, so they're 100 years old in cyber years, right? It's like dog years, but we talk about in cyber years.
Cyber years.
Right? Or privacy years too, because remember, privacy laws are rapidly changing at the state level. So you have to have that. That puts the business in a legally defensible position, but it also puts the CISO in a legally defensible position, because now you're saying, well, I'm making certain decisions, but I'm also reporting up. And there's that everybody's now involved in that process. But one of the things I see a lot in class action lawsuits, particularly against big companies, is that they're going after the board and they're saying, you weren't paying attention, you weren't on this, like you weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing. And of course, they're always hanging the CISO out to dry. But if you have regular line items on your board agenda and it's being discussed and there's reporting and all of this is happening, well, it's really hard to say that the trustees and the boards and things weren't paying attention to what was happening, because they're actually demonstrating that. And you can look at board minutes and say, okay, we did discuss this. And the CISO then there's more people to kind of go, okay, it's not just, the finger isn't just getting pointed at the CISO. We're all responsible for what's happening here.
Shared responsibility, shared coverage.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Let me ask you a very popular heated topic: incident response.
Yeah.
Incident response, right? So in the past, incident response was call a security company. They get you somebody who logs into a system, checks out logs, hunts, puts their Sherlock Holmes cap on, and starts super sleuthing through their network to find out, where I had a breach, how did it occur, and everything. And this is almost this could almost dovetail as one of our new topics, which is, this is not like it is on TV, right? where it's not, Criminal Minds or anything. You have somebody sitting there with all their little, tchotchkes on their monitor saying, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this," right? There's no Penelope there, to pick on that character. But really, incident response is so much evolved, I think, in the past year and a half. 2023 specifically, there has been a fundamental shift that I've noticed in incident response, and that now includes a cyber attorney. But why? Why do we need a cyber attorney? Why wouldn't the insurance carrier or maybe our general counsel? And I think you've alluded to the general counsel, but why now a cyber attorney should be the spearhead in this initiative?
Yeah. So first off, you see a lot of court cases talking about the fact that general counsel is going to be wearing two hats, right? And general counsel always wears two hats, particularly when they're in-house general counsel. They're wearing the business advice hat, and then they wear the legal advice hat, right? And sometimes those lines get very blurry, and it's very difficult to say, like, well, what are you really providing them? When I engage with clients, I always make it very clear, you are hiring me for legal services. I am not providing you business advice. I am not giving you business advice. That is on somebody else. I'm providing you with legal advice related to cybersecurity services. And then I engage experts, technological people, the tech guys that you were talking about, Andrew. Like, they're my experts. They're going to tell me the information that I can't possibly know because I'm a lawyer, right? I'm not a tech person. I understand what they're saying, but I'm not going to pull the logs off the firewall and understand how that's not my job. My job is for you, tech guy, to tell me. And then I tell the client, this is what happened, and this is our legal responsibility. So you see lawyers getting brought in earlier, and they should be brought in earlier, because all of those conversations I just talked about, when you engage me as an attorney and as for legal services, and I engage my experts, all of that is then shrouded in the attorney-client privilege, because you're putting those layers in place. You're saying the language that courts recognize. You're my expert. You're providing me with an expert opinion so that I can provide legal advice to a client. And that's all work product and privilege. But when you see general counsel engage them, or then it gets very confusing and you have to prove it up. I like to start off with the premise of, I'm a lawyer, prove that I'm not giving legal advice. Go, right? So
Right.
if all I do is provide legal advice to clients, then it's really hard for you not to say that. The other thing is, a lot of times in these cases, it goes from data breach and incident response to litigation. So having that segue with your counsel is going to be really important. Now, a lot of times I get brought in because I'm not insurance defense counsel. So you may have an insurance counsel come in, right? You may say, okay, it's time to trigger that provision. You need to bring in insurance counsel. I still tend to hang around and provide guidance to my client, because remember, I'm a big fan of cyber liability insurance. You should have it, you should buy it, all that other stuff. But if that insurance defense counsel works for the insurance company, right? That's who's paying their. So my clients usually say, we don't want you to go anywhere because we want you to advise us. Like, he's saying or she is saying one thing, but we want to know, what does that mean for us? Like, if we settle, if we do this, if we do that, like, what does that really mean for our liability? Because once insurance runs out, they're gone. They're not paying for anything else. Right? So if you have coverage $1 million, $2 million, you look at the cost of data breaches nowadays, it's so expensive. It's exceeding coverage. And then the lawsuits come and they're asking for 7, 8 figures in settlement numbers. I mean, it's ridiculous. And so then what do you do? The insurance isn't paying that.
No. And once the money runs out, their attorney is satisfied their requirement, minimized how much of the payout, and they're gone.
Right. So, you really have to you need the cyber coverage because it's expensive to respond to a data breach. But a lot of my clients end up hiring me post breach because they're like, we want someone who's representing our interest, who's only representing our interest and only has our best interest at heart.
Right. But somebody who can speak who can speak litigate or who can speak
Right.
court talk, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
so
Yeah, you
really
have to be
you're a
able to explain
translator,
that.
you've got many hats here, but you're representing the client first and foremost, which
Right. Always.
can't be said for other. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and Angelo and I have had this conversation many, many, many times too. I do
Right.
think having a CISO's own, you know what I mean? And again, you can have joint defense agreements so everybody's communicating with each other and you cross every T and dot every I, but your CISO's always hanging out there, and businesses need to be, I think, more protective of their CISO.
So how would you? I'm just curious how you would structure that. So I go into a role. I want my own cyber attorney. Would that relationship be strictly between you and the CISO, or you, the CISO, and the company, you and the company, and to work with the CISO? Because there's a disclosure issue.
Right.
What can the CISO tell you if you're just his counsel or her counsel? They can't. There's so much they can tell you. So talk to me
a
about
lot
that.
of times too, and by the way, I am not providing legal advice. There's my legal disclaimer. This is not legal advice here, but in
Disclaimer.
theory,
Say maybe.
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, like, exactly, Andrew's got
Hypothetically.
Hypothetically speaking, you could structure it again so the company could hire, like, it happens, like, you can hire, you have to be careful because there's ethical concerns and things like that, but they can actually hire the attorney to represent a CISO. A lot of times, like, that will happen. Like, a conflict will arise, particularly in litigation, and the company, and if the officers and directors are being sued along with the company, well, now the officers and directors in the company can't have the same attorney, but they can hire somebody, or they can reimburse, or whatever the case may be. It can be part of the CISO's compensation or part of your employment agreement with the company, that, look, if something goes sideways here, I get my own attorney to represent me, and we're going to share information up until the point where a conflict arises, in which case they're going to take over my whatever the representation of me is, right? And then everything disclosed amongst the parties still is maintained amongst the parties confidentially. But there's ways of structuring it. There's always ways, unless it's illegal or unethical, there's always a way of structuring something so that you can protect and the CISO feels protected, right? Like, part of it is CISOs are afraid to do anything nowadays. I mean, I'm not going to speak for you, Angelo. I see the cases, I can't even imagine.
How do you protect a company when you're afraid to take action?
Right.
I mean, does by knowing something put you liable for it? What about not knowing it?
Right.
I mean, both of those put you in a liability state. And then what if I can't know it because I didn't get funding for a particular product that would give me the visibility to allow me to understand what's going on here? This is where things get sticky and get issues oriented. So,
and having security counsel, somebody who's a security attorney, cybersecurity attorney, right? Like, there to advise the CISO on things like, I mean, you might have one for the company and then a separate one for the CISO. We talked, right? That's what we were just talking about. But just having a cybersecurity attorney that the CISO can work collaboratively with is going to be helpful, because my goal, right? When I'm working with a client, my goal isn't to necessarily get the cheapest price, right? Like, that's not why you have me here. That might be the goal of general counsel. That might be the goal of the board, because, my goal is to see, like, well, what is this product that we're going to use? How does it affect our privacy and security posture? Do we need additional provisions in the contract in and around that? Do we have to make different disclosures to our customers, consumers, employees? Like, that's what I'm thinking about, right? Like, how does this new piece of software affect the privacy and security laws in and around the company? And then how do we limit, or what I like to call is create a legally defensible position? You do your due diligence, you send out your information, you review their SOC 2s or their ISO certificate, whatever you're going to be doing. And then that puts the CISO, it empowers the CISO, right? Because now you have an ally. You have somebody who's gone, yeah, we vetted this person. We vetted this, whatever what you want to do. As opposed to them just out there fishing at the end of the pier on their own.
Happens a lot. Happens to people who, especially who've never been there and been through an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's not, we don't live in a fair world, right? But it's not fair to expect one person to shoulder the burden of security and privacy for the entire organization. Like, it is a shared, as I think Andrew, you said, it's a shared responsibility model.
Mm-hmm.
When I teach enterprise risk management at Drexel, that's one of the things I talk about is the textbook we use talks about the democratization of risk. And it's a really
Mm-hmm.
interesting topic if you think about it. And what does democratization mean? It means that everybody is involved in the process of risk. What is one of the biggest risks to organizations is cybersecurity, right? Is the security of the data. And so considering how everybody has to have been on that, that's why you create a team. And it's not just the CISO. You have the CISO, you have the head of finance, you have the head of HR, you have the head of marketing, you have legal, and they're all having these discussions because you're never going to be able to see the forest for the trees as the CISO. Like, you're always going to be involved in the minutia of the details, but other people may ask like stupid questions that are not actually stupid, but makes you think, oh, like, I never thought about that way. You know what I mean? So like having those discussions becomes really important. I'm really a big fan of.
And listen, this is generally the way I start off. I mean, I go through the organization and one, introduce myself, and two, have a kind of an interview conversation with the heads of all these departments to make sure that, one, they understand what I'm looking for to protect, and two, they understand what want to protect may not be what the business wants to protect, but they may have an additional item that the business needs to know about. There's a risk here, and they may not know they have the risk. They may think it's just innocuous.
Right.
Yeah. Example. Every agent in, let's say, HR place has access not only to see social security numbers, but also maybe some other paraphernalia like, health records, accounting numbers, stuff like that. Why do they need to have access to it? What's their reasoning? And if they do, can they generate reports on it? Stuff like that. These are the things that don't come out until you have a conversation.
Right.
And when you have that conversation, people start going, ooh, ooh, ooh. So.
And they never think about it that way. Like, they're just because they're focused on doing their job, as they should be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you've got to have those discussions within the company because it's going to bring risk to light that nobody thinks about. And it benefits everybody. And it reduces risk, reduces liability. It makes so much sense, and people think it's such a waste of time. But the bigger waste of time is dealing with a data breach and then having to get sued for it, right? Like, talk about a time suck. Think about how much productivity you lose. Like I was, joking before we started this about like, what are like lawyers? They always think we're like a drain on things. But if I can avoid litigation for you or put you in a position where we win on a motion to dismiss or we're out of the case early, think about how much money we just save.
Yeah.
Because you're not just in my fees, which, right? Like, I know everyone always complains about, but well worth it if you're not spending, if the head of your IT department, the head of finance isn't stuck in a deposition for 3 or 4 days. Like,
or in handcuffs.
Also time suck.
Also time suck.
Absolutely. What pain to have to go down there and bail them out.
Hey, it's already coming, right? We're already hearing about these high profile cases where executives are potentially looking at personal liability issues or even potentially prison sentences, right? I mean, and I guess the other vector I see for a cyber attorney, when I'm partnering with a company, let's say a large, multi-headed hydra of a Fortune 100 company, and I'm just a provider for them. I'm just a vendor for them. They're getting pretty smart now, and they're starting to look at, oh, you want to partner with me? What's your security posture look like? Do you help get this stuff in a kind of in line to be able to provide that type of attestation or type of validation?
Absolutely. Because they're going to ask you, like, I do this a lot, right? Like I work with a lot of clients who are subject to Department of Labor guidelines, right? They issued cybersecurity guidelines in 2022, 2021. I can't remember the exact date. Right now, the years all blend together to me. But they issued these guidelines, and part of the guidelines, it was online security tips, cybersecurity, whatever. And then the third one was vendor management. And they talked about your third parties and things like that. And so now all of the vendors of any organization that is subject to DOL guidelines has to answer these like questionnaires and like, what do you do? And how do you do that? And what does that mean? And all this other stuff. And, but third-party vendors are a huge, I mean, you guys know this. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, right? They are like probably the number one place a hacker will go, because you're not just getting one company's data, you're getting everybody's, right? And because businesses are looking, like, different vendors provide different services, it may be a smaller organization. And so that organization has to be able to comply with, the mammoth company's security and privacy requirements. And, we work with them to get them ready. And we also work with them because they're going to have vendor requirements. And you also have to look at the contracts, right? Like, they're very quick to like, oh, we want to get this signed because this is a Fortune 100 or whatever company, and this is a big deal for us. And, just make it so that we can sign it. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, but you don't want to sign a contract and be in breach at the same time, right? So you want to make sure that I don't recommend that, right? If you're not ready or you need a runway, then you need to let them know, like, I'm going to need a runway here. I'll be in compliance, but it's going to take me 6 months to get there. And we'll keep you informed as we go along. But, you need to be
But I think it
that.
also enforces the seriousness of your intent. If you have a cyber attorney guiding you along the way, and you have, like, Angelo, we work with small companies as well that may not have the full executive staff, like a CISO, to be able to walk through it. So, bringing somebody like Angelo along, bringing somebody like you along, you're setting yourself up for success. Even though you need the runway, you're telling them, I'm serious about this.
Yeah.
I'm serious about this. I recognize your need for security and this posture, this level or whatever, be it a DoD requirement or Department of Labor, whatever. I'm picking the right people. I'm picking I'm picking Rebecca. I'm picking Angelo. I'm putting them on my team, be it fractional or whatever, as a retainer, but I'm putting them on the team to be able to show you and demonstrate to you this is going to get done.
Yep. Yeah. And there's definitely something to be said for that.
So, we've been, there's this whole thing of information security, and then we have this thing called data privacy or privacy. The reality is,
fancy, he calls it privacy.
I know, when I check my schedule, it's very open. So the overlaps, there tends to be a lot of overlap between information security and data privacy. Maybe we're not doing DFARS, which we might need to explain in and of itself. But when you start looking at them, there's some expectations between the two. And the overlaps kind of lend for, like, an information security officer being a data privacy officer, but not generally vice versa. So you want to opine on that, Rebecca? Use your vast knowledge.
My vast knowledge of data privacy. So here's the thing. You can't have privacy without security, right? It's like old song, you can't have one without the other. Right. So you have to have both. So I am a big fan of creating a privacy officer and a security officer, both on the PST, constantly working together, because if you're going to deal with data privacy, you have to be working hand in glove with your cybersecurity. Your DPO and your DSO have to be working together. Because there's going to be things that people want to do that are going to affect both areas, right? But you see a lot of law and regulation in and around privacy now, right? First, it started off with Europe with the GDPR, and then it kind of moved across the pond to the country of California, which has its own weird set of laws and things like that. But it's spread out, and you see, I think there are about 10 states now that have privacy laws on the books, and many, many more who have plans on putting them on the books
Right.
in 2024. And
Mhm.
so considering it's not just like, okay, well, we're going to have two-factor, and we're going to have some, we're going to have great backups, and we're going to have that's not enough when you're dealing with data privacy. You have to be thinking, what am I doing with this data? What do I have to tell the data subject I'm doing with this data? And then how do I, how can I do what I need to do from a privacy perspective? Erase, correct, port, whatever the privacy laws allow them to do. And are you going to, like for California residents, are you going to do something different than New Jersey that doesn't currently have a data privacy law? Or are you going to say, look, I'm giving everybody the same, if you call me and you say, I want you to erase me, it's not going to matter. Like, you got to make these decisions, but then you also have to functionally be able to do it. And so it gets very complicated. And so you have to understand what the law requires, what the company is capable of doing, and then be able to kind of go from there. And then also you have to have the contractual language in and around a lot of this stuff to make sure that you're, again, not running afoul, kind of what Andrew's question was before with having a security attorney. I know what we're doing. We're going to get there. I think that was a really valid point. Demonstrate having those people on retainer, like if you can't have it in-house, because it's going to definitely show a commitment to privacy and security, which I never like talk about them separately. You ever notice I always talk about cybersecurity and data privacy, because they really do function together as kind of it's a group effort.
Would you say that the roles of information security officer and DPOs should be a separate role?
Yes.
Okay. And would you say
that
in that separate role, those responsibilities, although overlapping, there's responsibilities that need to be held by each, and the teamwork that you said to work together. How much of that plays into third party risks? You talk about data processing agreements. Your third party, you send some marketing data to them.
Mm-hmm.
They receive it. Then what do they do with it?
Right.
Yeah. Talk to me about what a DPA is, so people know.
So a DPA is a data processing addendum, or it's the contractual document, which basically governs what are the privacy obligations. Now, when I write DPAs, not ones for Europe, because they're a little bit differently, then you have to have standard contractual clauses too, although now with the framework, whatever. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that. When you're writing a DPA, I like to include both privacy and security provisions, because like I said, you have to have kind of both. But a DPA should tell the processor, the person who you're giving the data to, the third party, what can you do with this data, right? It explains to them, I am trusting you with this data. This is what you can do with it, and you can't do anything else. If you're going to do anything else, you have to come back to me, and you have to talk to me about it. Or if you get a data subject access request, a DSAR, you have to come back and ask me, like, what do I do with this, right? Like, because I'm the person who's in charge of this information. So you need it dictates what happens in and around that data. And I think they're really important, particularly companies. They don't think about it this way, but most of them traffic in data, right? They're not trafficking. I mean, we sell widgets and we do all like this stuff, but you're really selling information. Why is Amazon the behemoth it is? It's because it knows what you're going to buy before you buy it, right?
Yeah, and that's annoying.
It knows. It is kind of annoying sometimes, especially when things pop up in my feed and I'm like,
except when they're
I
on
really
sale.
don't want that.
Well,
yeah. Kind of a sucker for being on sale. Anyway, but you know what I mean? Like their algorithms understand what you're searching for and what you're looking for, and then all of a sudden it's popping up in your social media and it's information about you, right? And so, and all businesses are like that. Even like healthcare, right? The service they provide you is they're going to make you feel better, or they're going to tell you you're okay. But really, it's all the information, the bits and pieces about you that forms that opinion, right? You gather all of that information. What is that information? It's data. They're collecting data about you to form a diagnosis. It's exactly the same thing with privacy and security. I'm always fascinated because companies and people, they go, well, when it comes to doctors, they go to the doctor. When it comes to data privacy and cybersecurity, like, oh, I want to spend the money. Why? If you had cancer, would you say, oh, I'm going to cure my own cancer? No, you're not going to do that. You're going to go to a doctor and say, help me.
Mhm.
Why would you do anything differently when you're dealing with the information that forms your business? Like, this is the most important thing you own. So, sorry, I went off on a tangent. The processing addendums, though, are really important because it's going to tell your vendor exactly what they can do with the data. The more particular you are, the less wiggle room they have, and the less chance you have of people selling things and doing things with your information that you don't want them to do, or you're not allowed to do, which is the
Right.
other big issue.
I like that. I like that.
So in the
I'd love to have Rebecca back.
I couldn't say that fast enough.
I think she has more
I know
words.
we have
See? I have nothing else to say.
nothing else to say. I don't believe it. But listen, in the last few minutes, we first of all, thank you again for taking the time and being one of our guest speakers for the series. But one last question, and it's going to nag in my head. Have you run across an instance where the security officer and the privacy officer are not in accord with each other? Headbutting.
No, because I always put them in place. So I'm the one who's coming in and going, hey, you look like a good person and you look like a good person and we're going to work together. Plus, I'm usually involved in the conversation. And despite what, my spouse might think, I'm actually a really good like mediator and like I'm
There
a
you
good
go.
listener. So yeah, so I can, or what Angelo might think.
Another great reason to have a cyber attorney in your repertoire.
Yeah.
But I guess Angelo, your famous
Yes.
quote that you always say is what?
Complexity is the enemy of security. If you can't
And
figure
yet-
it out, you can't understand what it is, and you can't understand how secure you are.
Right. And yet we're living in a complex world. And sometimes we just need a Sherpa, a guide, an attorney in this case, to help us get to the right path and do the right thing. So folks, thank you so much for joining us. We will have, if she allows us to come back, Rebecca back on. Just
Anytime
as
with you
a
guys.
thank you. Just as a reminder that in Goliath Security's website, we do have a link to xpanlawpartners.com. That's Rebecca's firm. And we do like to make sure that if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Use our portal to get to her if you can't remember. But as I always say, the best security device resides between our ears, if we so choose.
And
So,
Rebecca, do you have a saying?
do you have a saying?
Luck favors the prepared.
Ah,
Ooh, we're
like you.
all right. Thank you so much. So that's our new phrase too. Thank you all, and we'll catch you on the next episode. And look forward to talking with Rebecca at another episode. Thanks again. Take care.
Yo!